Greetings, family, and welcome to the second Let's Remember Together video. In this video, we're going to follow the instructions in Psalm 78 regarding how we should remember together. Psalm 78 is a wisdom psalm, which means through it, God is sharing his wisdom with us. Our challenge with this psalm, as is always the case when reading the Bible, is whether or not we're going to make what God is teaching a part of how we live. So the question is, are we going to put the instructions contained in Psalm 78? Are we going to put these instructions into practice? Psalm 78 has 72 verses, but we're going to focus on verse 1 through 8. In these verses, Asaph, that's the author, gives instructions. Now let's remember, this is wisdom from God. So Asaph gives instructions that we should tell stories to each other. He even provides a formula for the stories. But not just that we should tell stories to each other, but who should tell the stories and whom they should be told to. The final thing that we will learn in these verses are the benefits, both positive and negative, for taking these instructions to heart. One last thing before we read. This psalm, in its entirety, would have been read by a highly respected leader during a communal assembly. Think of it this way: a highly respected teacher of God's word teaching in large community gatherings. Let's start with verses 1 through 4 and learn together. Psalm 78, 1 through 4. Starting in 1, "Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from of old. Things that we have heard and known that our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done." We know that this is a wisdom psalm and that it would have been delivered by a highly respected man in a large communal setting because of these words: "Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth." And then this is where we learn that this is in fact storytelling. "I will open my mouth in a parable." So this highly respected teacher, he's going to tell a story. And then now is the construction of that story. "I will utter dark sayings of old." So the story begins with dark sayings of old. We would understand this to mean these dark sayings of old. These are the mistakes that humanity has made. The dark sayings of old. And then the other indication of the structure of these stories is given to us down here. Tell to the coming generation. What do we tell them? The glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. So these stories, they consist of dark sayings of old, and they consist of the glorious things that God has done, his mighty works. That's the construct of the story. Now, what is the process? Who are these stories told to, and how are they passed on? We get that in verse 3 and 4. It says, "Things that we have heard and known that our fathers have taught us." So we've heard them and we know them because our fathers have taught us. Our fathers have told us these stories. And then it goes on and says, "We will not hide them from their children." And this their children, think of that as their descendants. So our fathers told us, and then we won't hide what our fathers told to us. We won't hide that from our fathers' descendants. We could think of this as we won't hide that from our fathers' grandchildren. So we retell these stories to our grandchildren. And when we retell them to our grandchildren, we are telling them to the coming generation. So now we understand that we are to tell these stories, and we know this because a great man of God has instructed us in community that we should be telling these stories to our children. And these stories should include both the dark sayings of old, the mistakes that humanity has made. We might even think that as the evil deeds that humanity has performed. And these stories would include the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. And then the process of telling these stories is that we hear them from our fathers. And even if you haven't heard these stories from your fathers, you can be that first father to start telling these stories. And then you tell these stories to your children. And the expectation is that your children will tell them to their children. So these stories are passed on from generation to generation. Now let's take a look at 5 and 6, and we're going to hear more about the process, the passing on of these stories. So it starts off in 5, where it says, he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel. He is God, and he here is also God. So he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach to their children. So God has commanded our fathers to teach to their children. So we're getting a repeat of what we've previously learned. And anytime God repeats something, we should know that he is serious about what he's saying. Because we are slow to learn, he's telling us again the same thing. So, which he commanded to our fathers to teach to their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn. So he has commanded our fathers to teach to their children. And then when we do this, fathers, when we teach to our children, when we tell these stories to our children, we're doing that so that that generation knows them, but we're also doing that so that the generations that are yet to be born will know them. We are telling these stories. When we tell these stories today, it is right for us to think that as we're telling these stories, we are in fact today loving our descendants, even those who aren't born, because we are sharing with them these stories. We're sharing with our children these stories that God has told us that we should share with our children, but not just that we share them with our children. We share them with our children in a way that causes them to share these same stories with their children. So the process goes on and on. Now let's finish this up looking at 7 and 8, and here we learn of the great benefits of telling these stories to our children and telling them in a way in which they understand that they too are to tell these stories to their children, so that this process goes on even after God has called us home to be with him. And so the benefits are, and they're broken down in positive and negatives. And so here in 7, the positive effect of telling these stories, these correct stories to our kids, are so that they should set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. This is the benefit that God is informing us that comes from our telling of these stories to our children, that their hope will be set in God, that they will remember his works, and they will keep his commandments. They will live lives that honor him. And then here is the negative. Verse 8 gives us the negative for not telling these stories. This is the outcome. And that they should not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose hearts was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God. So when we tell these stories, their hope is in God, and they don't forget the works of God, and they keep his commandments. When we don't tell these stories, they're like generations beyond us, generations that didn't know God, generations before us that were stubborn and rebellious, and their hearts were not steadfast. Their spirits were not faithful to God. So the stakes are high, and the benefits are great. If we learn these stories and we intentionally teach these stories and teach them to our children with the understanding that they too will teach these same stories, that they will simply repeat the stories that we have told them, that the benefits are that their hope will be in God. They won't forget his works, and they will keep his commandments. And the negatives are quite serious. We want for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren to be faithful to God. Okay, let's summarize. First, God has given us instructions through his wisdom literature that we are to tell stories. Stories about the relationship between God and humanity. Number two, these stories should include both the mistakes that humanity has made and the good things that God has done. Number three, these stories are to be told and retold from generation to generation. Number four, the positive effect of telling and retelling these stories is that our hope remains in God and we keep his commandments. And number five, the negative effect of not telling these stories is that we become rebellious and are not faithful to God. Our next video, we will actually begin the telling of a story that aligns with the structure that we have been given here, and the telling of a story that is consistent with this season, this time that is leading up to Resurrection Sunday. Family, stay tuned and look for the next video. God bless.